Okay, so as I was saying, I'm looking forward to the discussion, and hopefully the point of this, and it's great to be at Marxism where you can have these discussions, because we need to be basically fighting fit for a return to the class struggle and getting stuck right in Scotland. I'm going to start with just making some comments, because I want to, and I've got the chance to, on the general election results nationally. I think I was reading somewhere, I'm not sure if I was reading this or I've just made it up myself, but the decision by May to call a snap election could go down in history as the biggest political mistake in British political history. I mean, incredible. To repeat, she sought to increase the Tory majority with a snap election to make real their perceived popularity. Yet another example of how never believe the bubble and never believe your own press. Often the rulers are brought down by their own belief in their own power when we all know that they're, not as strong as they make out. Every poll suggested this would be the case for the Tories, the media, the right-wingers in and out of the Labour Party. Corbyn attacked, smeared, vilified continually for 2 years in every sphere of society in the media. You know it's bad when in every topical radio comic programme you hear them just having a go at Corbyn, and it makes you sick to your back teeth. But it seemed to me at the beginning of this election with the manifesto and just early on that Corbyn maybe thought to himself, well, if I'm going to go down, I'm going to go down fighting, and I'm going to go down with a manifesto that's true to me and is about socialist principles, and as I think it was Simon Jenkins advised before it, just to let rip, and that's what he did. The election campaign of the Tories exposed completely, mainly for the Tories, how painfully weak Theresa May's government is, and there is no question now she's simply and literally clinging on to power, and it's a moment of deep, profound crisis for the British state, for our rulers, incredible crisis. Jeremy Corbyn is the Prime Minister in waiting. I really like it when Alex Clinicus quotes the Times about saying, oh God, the only thing that's uniting them is Jeremy Corbyn, the thought of a Marxist government. And I really liked it when Charlie Kimber exposed the fact that 30% of Sun readers voted for a Marxist government. But propped up by a reactionary, sectarian and homophobic DUP, they're as weak as anything. Now, honestly, just a little bit on the £1.5 billion given to the DUP. It's incredible because, in Scotland there's utter disbelief at the hypocrisy of the money being used to buy the DUP, which in any other country in the world would be called a bribe, because that's what it is. And it has been mildly enjoyable, even in this short period of time since the election, to watch the so-called ascendant Tories hiding, squirming, and being held to account for their claim that we would have fantastic influence for Scotland and Westminster, coming back with absolutely zero zilch while the DUP walk off with, whatever, £1 billion in their back pocket. Lastly, we need to make a comment in terms of for socialists and the left of the class struggle about the Grenfell Tower, because for me, I think that kind of changed things in terms of the depth of anger and the class struggle right across the UK. And it added to everything that was already there post the election, exposing everything that's wrong with neoliberalism, the vivid horror is seeing how they put people's lives second at the bottom of everything, and the only thing that matters to these people is the profit and the desires of the super rich, the desires of them to see a nice place when they walk out onto a normal street, the desires of profit above all else. I believe, we need to campaign for justice for the people of Grenfell continually, that it's corporate manslaughter, that it's a result of systematic neglect, abuse and disdain for working class people, and that currently still, even some weeks after, you feel that searing, bitter anger. I have to say that watching this stuff, reading it, looking at it, I've been so angry that I couldn't think and that I can't breathe. And I think that really runs through a lot of things for us as socialists, because immediately political conclusions, massive, huge, big political conclusions are being drawn by people facing this and at the heart of this horror and in their communities, massive political conclusions about what kind of world they live in. We know what kind of world we live in. We don't need to explain that to people. It's not our job to say, oh, by the way, capitalism's bad and socialism's good. It's our job to say, look, why this happens and how it can be stopped, and to encourage that fight for justice. Grenfell says what the Tories, north and south of the border, are all about. And north and south of the border, they absolutely are being driven right now by a complete fear of our anger and in the working class response to the horrors of their system. So again, no matter where you are, I would argue the tasks of the left are to get justice for Grenfell. Justice in the immediate sense, But I would put that justice in the broadest political sense. When we fight for rights in our workplace, when we fight against racism, when we fight for the rights of migrants, when we fight for decent rents, when we fight against evictions, and when we fight for the disabled, we're fighting for justice for Grenfell. So, on the general election vote in England, clearly signals a move to the left. What do the results mean for Scotland? Does it mean a move to the right? Look at the Tories, how can they be back? Is Labour back? What's happening with the SNP and what's happening now with the independence movement, and where do we as socialists kind of place ourselves in that context? So it's a lot of questions. That's why after the discussion we'll have achieved some really good clarity. When I was thinking about it, trying to solidify all the strands, there's a really good article by Donny Glockstein, a comrade, in this issue, the ISJ, kind of putting a historic thing in a context of using the terms of class and nation and attempting to analysing it using Marxist tools. But when I was thinking, I came across, I summarised some things. So discussion points, things to think about. One, the solidifying of the unionist vote around the Tories. I'm going to argue that it's in part backed up by Labour, as they targeted voting against the SNP in the referendum as the campaigning issue and priority for the 21st century. The complete lack of inspiration or motivation of working class by the SNP. The SNP didn't get the vote out. There's words like timid, insipid, managerialist. Thirdly, clear failure of the SNP's focus on the EU membership tied to a second referendum. Fourthly, the SNP's actual policies and the experience of the SNP at this milestone of 10 years in government in Scotland, and how have they done in fighting austerity? What are they doing? What are they actually doing? Where they have power to affect the lives of working class people in Scotland? I'm going to talk at some point in the meeting about our strikes in the colleges. Fifthly, I'm going to introduce the discussion really that is taking place across Scotland, combined with independence, SNP, and what is the Corbyn effect, bounds, what is happening, what is the appeal of Corbynism up for discussion in Scotland. So these are kind of things I thought I should think about and answer. Whether I do or not is another matter. Let's go through the Scottish election results. I'll just go through each part in turn a wee bit and then carry on. So, first thing I want to say is in the general election in Scotland, the SWP called for a vote for the left. We had discussion in the party, and despite the burning desire of many in the party outside and the left to vote for that kind of policy, that kind of government, to vote for Corbyn, the kind of scale of the betrayal and the kind of treachery, the class treachery of the Labour Party in 2014 was still there. And in fact, the recent council elections in May, which I'm not going to mention too much, kind of was like a bit argued like closure for the working class. We gubbed them in 2015 and the 2016 parliamentary, and then they were finished, with Labour and the council elections in May. But that means, I think, we argued that we couldn't just categorically call for a vote for Scottish Labour, which are more of later, much more of later. But similarly, with the record of the SNP, there's no way we were going to be cheerleaders for this party, which has inherited the people for the Yes movement, a lot of socialists, a lot of the hopes and dreams of that movement. So it was vote left for where you felt the candidate would best place to fight austerity and anti-racism and stuff like that. So in the elections, the SNP won the general election in Scotland, just to let you know, just in case you didn't know, when Ruth Davidson was brought down to London probably and greeted in her, because just remember, the media and the right are always looking for the next big figure. They're always looking at, whether it be on the far right or whether it be, the traditional Tory scum right. They're looking for the next big figure. So they've lost Farage, and Theresa May's not looking too good. So here comes Ruth Davidson. Yes. The Tories didn't win the election in Scotland. The SNP get close to 1 million votes, just under 1 million. They get 37% share of the vote. They get 60% of all the MPs, 35 out of 59. So win. However, this is where the big however comes in. They lost 21 seats for their historic high in 2015. And also on top of that, their actual vote was down by 500,000. 500,000 less people voted for the SNP. Now, first things first, that vote sort of, to me, reinforces the historic nature of that 2015 vote on the back of the massive movement of 2014, where they get 56 and every, Labour, Lib Dem and Tories get one each. It reinforces the earth-shattering nature of that. No one expected them to get that, yet the scale of the drop is significant. And as socialist worker, Raymond's been very good with socialist worker articles in the paper, like encourage communists to look back and read through that. The gloss coming off the SNP. The Tories went from 1 MP to 13, with 29% of the vote. They doubled their number of votes for 2015. They get 300,000 more votes. So why is that? If you look at the politics and what's been happening in Scotland since 2014, people can talk about this, there is no doubt the Tories are the party to vote for as to defend the British Union. As Socialist Worker quoted, the Tories have continued their successful rebranding as the staunch defenders of the British Union. Whether it's a rebranding, it's just that's what they are, the Conservative and Unionist. If the key issue for you is the SNP not winning in defence of the Union, as Scottish Labour has argued, then it doesn't mean they're all going to rush to vote for you in Labour. They're going to vote for real Unionists and also where they have voted for before. So the continuing trend for the Scottish Parliament in May elections is in the south of Scotland, the Borders, Perthshire, the North East. These are traditionally in the past voting Tory areas, and it's the returning of the Conservative and Unionist Party and leaving the SNP. So look at Angus Robertson and Alex Salmond, the great figures of the SNP, and particularly in Perthshire in the North East. Part of the accepted wisdom of Scottish politics has been that we don't vote Tory. Okay? And for decades that maybe said we don't vote Tory. But to be honest, comrades, as socialists we've always argued that is where we have been, but it's not always where we were. And if we look at Tory voters as representing a class, we have a rich, we have an elite, we have an increasingly unequal society. We're millionaires. We've got, the lot of them that they have everywhere in this world, they are present and alive and kicking in Scotland. So it's not the case, for example, as people would point out, Glasgow itself was a Tory stronghold up into the 1950s. The Tories often returned MSPs. Now, I have to say at this point, it's been enjoyable to be able to go in demos and chant there are more pandas than Tories in Scotland. And I'm harking back to those days. But we need to look at where we've been and where we are and look at the Tory vote. The areas that voted Tory were the areas that had higher than average votes against independence, which was always not talked about post the referendum, because the areas where the SNP had held seats were not the areas that turned the highest votes for yes in 2014. And they're the areas also with the highest vote to leave the European Union, and they were previously Tory. And I want to argue this SNP strategy of tying their whole campaign to a second independence referendum tied to Europe helped make that vote for the Tories possible, combined with the Labour complete focus on the Union and the Union martyrs. Well, the Union martyrs, what am I voting for you for? I'm going to vote Tory if that's the way you're inclined. Too much focus on the EU, the Brexit result, too much appeal to this mythical demographic of the previously no-voting Remain voters who would suddenly become independent because of the power of the progressive nature and the wonder of the EU, ignoring the third of people that voted to leave in Scotland and ignoring the high percentage of yes voters that voted against the EU, and also ignoring or underestimating the extent to which people voted to leave but didn't have the leadership of the SNP's absolute love for the EU. I mean, absolute love for the EU. OK, so that was blah, 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 blah. The other things I do want to point, Labour's sole MP in Scotland urged tactical voting against the SNP. Kezia Dugdale, the leader of the Scottish Labour Party, in an interview said, yeah, vote Labour, but to keep out, we need to vote against the SNP, said the Scottish Labour leader, and that means Labour, but in some places, other parties best placed to beat the SNP. Hardly a Corbyn-like campaign and vision for Scottish Labour. Labour itself went from 1 to 7 seats, far more than predicted, 27% of the vote. Their actual vote was up by 12,000. Now, this is important for us in Scotland because there's a battle for the analysis of that vote. Kezia Dugdale, I could be wrong, I don't think mentioned Corbyn when she was saying thank you, people of Scotland, for giving us 7 MPs. She put it down to the Labour strategy that they'd adopted of defence of the Union and showed that it was, making gains. Because Kezia Dugdale was one of the people that signed up against Corbyn. No credit. So that's an important discussion. I'll come back to that later. I want to mention a wee bit about the turnout. The turnout in Scotland was down in every constituency, and overall it was down from 71% in 2015 to 66%, contrasted to an increase. So in the rest of the UK, it was up. Turnout was up by 2.5%. In Scotland, it was down by 5%. And as I said before, the number of SNP votes was 500,000 down. And while Labour increased its number of Scottish MPs, it actually got less votes, similarly in 2017 than 2015. So the question of turnout is crucial. And when you're a government, Scottish government, and you're 10 years and you've inherited the kind of hopes and dreams of that massive yes movement, then when it comes to turnout, there's nowhere to look. Can't blame anybody else for no turning your vote. You've got to look to the SNP as the inheritors of both the independence and the anti-austerity mood in Scotland and say, what have they done with it? What have they done with it? The message being repeated, as I said, is a bit like Theresa May's strong and stable mantra by a lot of the right in the media in Scotland, and the Indie Ref 2 is now off the table. To share this wee story, in fact, I was leaving the house the other day to go to a fracking meeting locally, to share it with ways, and my loyalist neighbour down the stairs came out in his garden and shouted, Angie, that's Indie Ref 2 deed, that's it gone. Right? That's the first words he spoke to me in about 2-3 years. And I just waved to him, I went, Greg, you'll be happy, the DUP's in power. Cut off. So I think we need to avoid that. Indie Ref 2 is dead. Because for us, it's never been about the SNP. And there's lots of, the situation in Scotland has changed for years. The support for SNP was far lower, for independence was far lower, and it never directly corresponded with the SNP vote. The SNP vote was higher than those that said they voted independence. And in 2015, you had a coming together of all the yes voters, the maximum yes voters, that argument all behind the SNP. So we're now no longer at the case where if you're pro-independence, I would argue you voted SNP in this election. And again, it's important to make that point because of the interpretation of Labour's success is a part of the argument across the UK about the Corbyn effect and about the appeal to working class and desire to smash the Tories and fight austerity and put something different. So it is part of that debate. So is it about independence? Not like about a week or so, a couple of weeks before the vote, there was a massive demonstration in support of independence, 20,000 at least by all accounts. What was that demonstration like? It was completely grassroots, organised by networks affiliated to the SNP voters, but not a part of the SNP machine. The SNP told people not to go there. They advised their MSPs not to go there. One MSP came along and went, why would I not come here? Don't care what they said, I'm going to speak, and spoke. But that was the interesting dynamic. In contrast to the SNP saying, don't go there, don't go. Why? I'll come back to this later, and again, if I don't get this all out at once. The key problem with the SNP is that they've adopted this managerialist, timid, lowering of expectations, and they have worked systematically to manage the expectations and message control our movement over the last 3 years. Completely triangulation. There's a word you didn't think you'd hear again. Oh, it sent a shiver down your spine. They have attempted to do that. And the big anti and the big pro-Indie demo didn't fit that picture because they were appealing to this small mythical demographic of the respectable, middle class, reasonable Remain voter who would maybe consider voting for an independence that wasn't too radical if the SNP put it to them. So this mad mob, working class people, again, many of them, first ever demo, which is incredible. You think of the demos that's been in Scotland over the last few years. This is my first demo, this is brilliant. Now, there's a couple of things on that demo. The main chant was Tory, 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 out, out, out. I kid you not. I'm not just making it up. Tory, 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 out, 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 continually. Whereas your demos would be intercepted with the occasional, oh, Jeremy Corbyn, Tory, 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 out, out, out. Yours was Tory, 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 out, 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 when the occasional, freedom. Do you know what I mean? I'm right. And also the shared demands of the movement, because actually, interestingly, I was on the anti-austerity demo last week in London. I felt I had to go for Grenfell. It's the first demo really in London that I've really wanted to go to for a long time, so I went. But the shared thing was also the occasional chants against the BBC and how they mistreat us. So that's, if you'd have shut your eyes and didn't look at the saltires, you could have been on the same demo. The other thing that the appeal for the platform at this mass kind of demo was, I think it was Thomas Sheridan put it, others put it, was vote for Corbyn, Corbyn victory, Corbyn to win, but not necessarily vote Labour in Scotland. And it was massively popular. Wonderful, 20 minutes. Here's me saying I didn't think I could speak for 10. So that's the point. So I think I've made already the point, support for independence not equal to the SNP votes. Again, before the Yes campaign, that was clearly not the case. You look at John Curtis, I recommend, he's got some good stuff on that. The other thing is, since 2014, the kind of base for support for independence is now higher than it was. So it's pushed that level that it stays at ordinarily up much higher. Other points to be made. A vote for Corbyn is Labour. So people can talk about that. Massive kind of influence of Corbyn, because why would it not be? People are bursting at the seams to vote for it. Now, if Scottish Labour or Labour had opened the door in any way, shape or form to a second independence referendum, not even to support, but anything, that would have pushed right through. As it was, again, to quote John Curtis, he talks about the Corbyn wash over Hadrian's Wall. Right? It's not quite a surge. Well, we'll come to what's happened in the last 4 weeks, but at that point for the election, all they needed to do was just open that door a crack, and I believe there would have been a whoosh. But until that was done, because of the history and because we were with Scottish Labour and the question of independence, it's not going to happen. But a vote for a Corbyn's Labour is not a vote against independence. Again, Dutch comrades, it's quite easy to go online and look. So there's the Common Space had a couple of good things where immediately after the vote they just took quotes for independence left figures, and that's quite interesting. And there's an article by a comrade and activist and indie movement figure, Jordan Daly, the Thai campaign, put a really good article in Common Space about the hopes and dreams of Corbyn and voting Corbyn, and actually said if Labour were to change their position in independence, they would think about joining the Labour Party. So don't let Kezia Dugdale or anybody tell you that increase, those 7 MPs are Kezia Dugdale's, or no, they're Jeremy Corbyn's. Jeremy Corbyn saved the Labour Party. I've tried to stop myself carrying on with a water analogy and all that, but I was saying it's more like as much that Labour surged in Scotland, it's that the SNP drained away and the Labour Party were left standing, propped up by Corbyn. Okay, so not against Indy. Again, here's a comment somebody put, I think it was in Common Space. The SNP performed poorly because they overestimated how Europhile Scots are, and Nicola Sturgeon underestimated the need to motivate and mobilise working class yes voters in 2014 with a radical agenda and inspiring vision. Voting Corbyn isn't voting against independence, and it's vital the independence movement understands the difference. That's Ben Ray arguing in Common Space. Nicola Sturgeon has since had a period of reflection and set the timetable back for independence, which is leading people to say it's off the cards and other people say it's delayed. So I think it's not off the cards, and it's interesting the response to that. The response by some in the independence left has been, yes, this is what we're looking for. Actually give us some time to campaign and don't obsess about Brexit. Let us put independence the case in its own terms and no tie it to this Europhilia. So, again, what has been the response? Voters uninspired by the SNP strategy, a managerialist government linked to a love of the EU. John Curtis, in March 2017, warned this. So did Jim Sillars. He's interesting to read. Actually, Jim Sillars in print, he's a left SNP, basically just called the leadership idiots in print. Blah, blah, they shouldn't have. I told them not to do this. And what did the idiots do? They done it anyway. John Curtis in 2017, when looking at the EU and independence in Scotland, said, doubtless, the SNP hopes to profit from the legacy of increased support left by that original ballot, the independence vote, but banging on about Europe could prove less fruitful in winning over those who previously voted no than the outcome of the EU ref in Scotland might lead one to expect. Yeah, spot on. Pat Kane, after the election, sort of analysing the SNP result, had said, what maybe should be a casualty of this election for the SNP is the kind of top-down managerialism and message control of the movement, symbolised by the departure of Angus Robertson and Alex Salmond. He says, it was a youth turnout and social media that won a battle against Dacre and Murdoch on a UK national level for Corbyn. That was the same vitality that powered the Yes movement. Haven't we lost some of that? That's just some of the responses. So, kind of wee summary elections. During the general election, Scottish Labour was banging on about the danger of the SNP in the referendum. The Tories were banging on about the Great Union of Great Britain. The SNP was banging on about the Great EU. And Corbyn was the only one banging on about bankers and the rich and austerity. And they wonder why they lost 500,000 working class votes. They wonder why. They're in a bad serious trouble now because the Tories have taken their seats back in the North East. And if they don't get their act together, the SNP has got... then they're real, the west of Scotland, the working class, the urban, the industrial, they're going to look to Corbyn and go, what? Do you know what I mean? So they're in a wee bit of a pincer moving, a wee bit of trouble. Anyway, insipid, uninspiring, lack of motivation, turnout. Just one example on turnout. The constituency that I'm in is Glasgow North East. Anne McLaughlin at the 2015 general election, to give her due, we're talking about sometimes we're comparing to 2015, but we need to remember that was historic. In 2015, she broke the swingometer. They didn't have a big enough swing to show in the graphic for her victory. But this year she lost by 200 votes, so the Labour, we've returned a Labour MP. The turnout in our constituency was down by 6,000 votes. The Labour vote went up less than 1,000. I'm not sure if these sums add up now, I'm reading about. The SNP vote fell by about 8,000 and Labour won by about 200. So what's the problem there? Motivation, getting out that vote, putting the radical alternative, being anti-austerity. No effort at all made by the National SNP campaign to appeal to the voters in the poorest parts of Scotland with any kind of energy or vision or better society, exactly the source of their victories. Does that sound familiar? You put people in power on the back of your own sweat and struggle, and they turn around and get complacent and think, you're all right, I'm going to run off and appeal to this other group of voters that I think can win it for me. So while their back's turned appealing to the other group of voters, the respectable group of voters that don't go in demos with saltires shouting freedom and get to fuck Tories, the people behind them thought, well, why would I vote? My mum voted Labour again. I was like, did you vote Labour? She went, are Labour no back? Doesn't know Kezia or Dugdale. Not interested. So it's not, what I'm trying to say is not an anti-independence vote, that vote. There's an interesting article I just read last night by an activist who was leading RIC activists during the 2014, leading SNP, Socialist, Left Nationalist, and Al Jazeera, Jamie Maxwell, which is titled, Will the SNP Lose to Corbynism? Very interesting. He says, it's a legitimate concern. Corbyn now has every chance of becoming Britain's next Prime Minister. Faced with the choice of a left-wing Labour government, another span of chaotic Tory rule, growing constituency of Scots will vote Labour, even at the SNP's expense, even if it means postponing independence for foreseeable future. Now, until last night, this is what I've been grappling with over the last couple of months, I don't know. Also, a new poll for YouGov is putting Labour ahead of the SNP. I didn't believe it when Charlie said at his meeting, so I had to check it. But yeah, polling now ahead. But for us, all this reinforces is what we've argued consistently since pre-2014 right through to today, that the only reason we got within an inch of breaking up the British state to the benefit of all was because of that anti-austerity space that was opened up for working class people to express that deep bitterness and anger that is there because we are sick of it. We're sick of decades of neoliberalism. We're sick of being treated like dirt. We're sick of being the bottom of the pile, and we're sick of watching the rich getting richer. And we took that movement that far, and we delivered that SNP victory in 2015. And similarly, that is the key to the future in Scotland and the future for the left and the future for the working class, is to always put that at the heart. We always put class at the heart. It was never about just for its sake. And that's become stark probably over the last year or so with the SNP's message control. Finally, I want to finish up with the other factor about the SNP vote is the reality of the SNP in 10 years of power and their actual what they do. Not just what they say, what they represent, what they promise, what they actually do. And apologies here, because probably for the next 10 minutes, although that takes me my time, I'm going to talk about the FE strike. So I'm an FE college lecturer for 22 years, so I've been there through Labour, through thick and thin, through Labour, and obviously education's devolved, so focus on education. But 20 years ago, the Tories, while they were in power in Westminster, took Scottish colleges out of local authority and control, handed them over to boards of management, which were business people, and said, run it yourself. So for 20 years, we had 40-odd colleges in Scotland that were fighting on their own, fighting your own individual managers, fighting for your own pay, fighting for your own conditions. And the college managers did what every self-respecting bunch of greedy bosses would do. They gave themselves massive salaries, endless numbers of assistants, to the deputy, to the assistant, didn't go near a student, and plush offices. Don't forget the plush offices. Not once did New Labour promise to put this right. The SNP came into power and promised to put it right. They said, we're going to reorganise this and we're going to give you national bargaining as a union, which meant there's 5,000 college lecturers. We could do something about this. So we did. We went on strike last year for equal pay because the difference between the lowest paid and the highest paid college lecturer in Scotland is £12,000. You're doing a job storing away gala shields, you should be paid the same. Fantastic. Interestingly, our one day of strike in 2016, we went to the Scottish Parliament and it coincided with Alex Salmond's last day in the Scottish Parliament. And he came out and wandered amongst the crowd to check out if we were Labour lackey. I thought he's out checking if we were Labour patsies, you know, having a go at the SNP because we love Labour. Now, Scottish politics is a bit like that, you know, you can't. So there's Alex, and we're all going, get up, we want our pay, outside the Scottish Parliament. Get the bosses, we want our pay. And Alex is like, they're all posing with selfies with Alex Salmond. So anyway, we won that day. Tremendous victory. Year and a half later, greedy bosses, we're no paying you the money that the SNP government is giving us. They're no paying us. We had to go on strike again, and this time it was bigger. Over 3 to 4 weeks, 6 days of strike action, during the council election, then the snap election called. I'm cutting a long story short. What's the key thing about this strike? One, that we've won it twice, and if the money's not in my bank, and every college lecturer's bank by the end of July, we'll have to win it a third time, and win it we will. Key message. Thank you. Key thing is interesting, the extent to which our struggle brought us as union members, ordinary voters of the SNP, members of it, into conflict with a Scottish government. Now, let's be clear, the bosses were to blame. But this is political, this is education in Scotland. And John Swinney, who's the education minister, and Shirley Ann Somerville, who's some other made-up name minister that's got education in the title, completely ignored us, said nothing. One of the big chants was, Shirley Ann, what's the plan? She's the minister. Shirley Ann, what's the plan? We had to drag this Scottish government kicking and screaming to make even the slightest comment. And the day that John Swinney was forced to stand up in Parliament and actually mention our strike was very revealing. We were like, yeah, he's mentioned it. What did he say? Call off your strikes. Brutal. The other thing that's interesting in terms of message control, I'm friends with many an SNP activist on Facebook, Kate, like real, you know, people that are totally solid. And these are the people that post 10 times daily on the twists and turns of Scottish politics. And MSP trips, they've got a comment on it. Did any single one of them mention our dispute? Not once. Interestingly, I said to my colleagues and comrades, they can't attack us, so they're just ignoring us. Shameful. It led our vice president of the union, who was an SNP member, to declare recently that our love affair with bourgeois nationalism may soon be over. There was an SNP, lifelong SNP member in my work, Sandra, and during the days I'm thinking, you know, you're talking. And there was a Labour SP had a motion to support our strike in the Parliament, and it was getting no SNP MSP signing it. And I thought to myself, well, they're not going to sign it because it's Labour and it's so tied up where you can't back in it. You know, SNP people can't back a Labour motion. And I went to Sandra, what would you think of this motion? She went, well, what I'll tell you. She said, I got a phone call from my local office the other day saying, do you want to come and leaflet for the local MP candidate, SNP? She went, I tell you what, she said, I'm not lifting a single finger. I'm not getting out a single leaflet until you get this dispute settled. She's a lifelong, not a 2014 yes voter, a lifelong. And I went, and what do you think about SNP signing this motion? Do you think they should? She just looked at him and she went, they need to grow up here. And I was glad I spoke to her, because that was SNP members. I was angry they were getting harangued, harassed. And this was from the left. This was about our bosses taking government money, Scottish government policy, and ignoring it, and denying it, and attacking us. So, mind you, Ramey's article on the Socialist Worker is quite good because it did remind us of the time that John Swinney crossed a PCS picket line, I believe, on November the 30th, and then boasted about it. So, there we go, on with the deal. So, just some final comments. I probably know missed out quite a lot, but anyway, just like everywhere across the UK, anger is deep and bitter at the Tory onslaught, at inequalities, and the rich getting richer while we are left to rot or starve or die in tower blocks. And the class struggle can't be put off for the second Indie Ref. It's not the only show in town for the anti-austerity struggle, but it never has been for us as socialists. But the breaking up of Britain would be a step forward for all working people. Absolutely. And it's always been about us, for how we get there and where are we trying to get to. We're not going to get there to independent Scotland by appeasing Tory voters. We're not going to get there by reassuring the rich and having backroom deals and meetings with people like the guy that runs INEOS in Grangemouth and telling the Scottish people we don't like fracking and basically just kicking it into the long grass until they think we're no looking and then they can bring it back on the agenda. We're going to win it by united action in pursuit of working class issues. The pay cap is lifted in Scotland. Well, let's see it. Let's see it, and let's see the pay cap really lifted. What about 10%? What about pay rises at double figures to restore us back to what we would be? Let's call them to account. And it's by uniting communities facing racism, Islamophobia, scapegoating. It's by organising young workers being treated like dirt for union rights and decent pay. It's for saying no to austerity, no to cuts, no Tory mandate. And we need to join with everybody, no matter how they voted in the last general election, to make sure that we're all up to the tasks of doing this. Thanks.
Hello, can you hear that? Am I too close to the mic? Sorry. Well, as an escapee from another country, I've come over to this conference, and one thing has been worried me from looking at it from the perspective of being in the Irish Republic, is that the biggest surge in political activity in my lifetime, and I'm now 73, has been really what has been happening in the Labour Party. And I'm wondering how our comrades are coping with that in Scotland. And I would just ask our speaker to make a few observations about it. That's really the thing I want to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Angela, for that. I thought that was really, really useful. I want to say just a few things about what's happening in Scotland. First and foremost, I think it's important to put the issue around independence, the rise of the SNP, and what's been going on in Scotland in the past 2 years in the same context as the rise of Corbynism down here. The speed at which Corbynism appears to have taken place, given the media ignored it for months, and the same way in which the speed of the independence movement emerged towards the end of the referendum is identical in terms of what both of them represent is the resistance and the anger against austerity. The difference, and here I think is an important point to make, is that over the past 2 to 3 years, the way in which that anger against austerity has emerged was couched in terms of nationalism. What Corbynism has done has moved that dramatically to an explicit discussion of class. And that's fundamentally important for us, I think, because that's happening in Scotland as well. And here's a warning for down south, actually, down here. The disillusionment that's emerged with the SNP, and I'll temper how big that is, but certainly it's there, also is a warning to Corbyn. If Corbyn actually doesn't seem to carry that movement of class further to the left, that same kind of disillusionment can start to appear very, very quickly. And I think that's an important point about the volatility of these movements. I think Angela is completely right to put the question of class at the centre of what our understanding is, and in particular in terms of the Labour Party. I mean, again, just to emphasise this, it's quite an achievement for the Labour Party in the space of 2 years to go from being the dominant political force in Scotland, with the majority of MPs, to being third behind the Tories. That's really quite an achievement. And that was because of what Labour in Scotland represents, which is the anti-Corbyn wing of the Labour Party. And I think, again, as many people have said, the 13 MPs came about because of the element to which Corbynism drifted north of the border. And I'll just give you one anecdote from a comrade in Dundee, Jim. He's got a lovely story about a couple of apprentices who came to him in his work just before the election, young lads, who told him they decided they were going to vote Corbyn. And in the discussion, it became apparent that they didn't know that Corbyn's name wasn't on the ballot paper. And you had to explain how do you vote for Corbyn in Scotland, and in this case in Dundee. That's an indication of both the class element, but also the way in which this Corbyn identified a whole group of people. 2 final points I want to make. One is because we put class at the centre of our understanding, not nationalism, it means we have an understanding that politics which doesn't simply lead us into the SNP, which for many of the left over the last 2 years, that's exactly where they've ended up. Either uncritical of the SNP and being outside it, or actually going whole hog and joining it. And I think that's a disaster for the left, the revolutionary left. Scotland needs a revolutionary party. We need an organisation which puts class and class politics at the centre of our politics. Thanks.
Yeah, in the aftermath of the election, I suppose people in Scotland have, for years and years, there's always been that thing about, well, there was no Tories, as Angela said, there's more pandas in Scotland than there was Tory MPs, and part of the sort of background in Scotland, I suppose, about that was that the problem is that people in England don't vote, that we're constantly subjected to a Tory government because people in England don't vote for Labour, and it's worth now just re-emphasising that if it wasn't for the 13 Tory MPs in Scotland, we wouldn't have May in power just now. So that just gives us a sort of degree of reflection about that. There's a couple of things I just wanted to take up. First is that in my family, right, there was a huge debate going on in my family when many of them were saying that they wanted to vote Labour. But their concern was that if they voted Labour, they would split the vote and the Tories might get in. So that was played out, I'm sure, not just in my family. There are some who are more political than others, but all of them. That included my dad. My dad was phoning me up saying, who should I vote for? I'll tell you, my dad's never done anything but vote Labour in his life. He's always voted Labour all the way through it, and yet he's phoning me saying, I don't know whether I should vote Labour or whether I'll let the Tories in. And this is in North Ayrshire. There was no chance that the Tories were going to get in, even, what? But that was still how that debate was framed. So I think we should, that when Angela was talking about the wash, that wash was there. It just needed that sort of crack to open up. There was one thing that Angela didn't mention about, which I think is really important, and that was the rally in Glasgow when Corbyn came up, where, one of the biggest rallies in Glasgow, organised around Corbyn coming, and it does show, I think, that in terms of the class dynamic, there is the space there for the left around the Labour Party to grow and to have that. One final thing as well is that I mean, from a Labour unionist point of view, I think there's an uncertainty, because if they were to say that they were in favour of the second independence vote or would adhere to that request, I think that would boost Labour. But if that brought a Corbyn government, I don't think it would necessarily mean that we would have an independence victory, because Corbyn, and depending on what he delivered, might be how that would play out. And the final thing, I've got one more minute, I'll just put it in, but I don't think we should underestimate how nasty Davidson's Tory party are playing. I mean, when you see her there dressed as a soldier, giving it, Poppy Day, she's playing with some really nasty elements. And at the local elections, although people talked about the Tories being back, actually they got more counts, but actually it represented about 23% of the vote, which is what the Tories have always been on. But in a PR system, they got about 23% of those that were returned. That was interesting. But they also got some serious Orange Order members who were elected as Tories at the time, and we shouldn't underestimate the nastiness of some of the things that they're doing.
Surely not. I think it's right for us to emphasise the return of class politics, because as Michael's just finished up saying there, that it's really the return of the Tory vote to the Tories. The Tories are historically the only party that's ever achieved more than 50% of the vote in Scotland. They're very, very far away from ever achieving that again. But their vote has returned in their traditional heartlands of the borders and the farmers and the fishermen in the northeast. But that's what happens. I mean, it's very difficult to predict. We've had articles in the review, I wrote one, Bob wrote one, almost second-guessing what was going to happen. I said, isn't it brilliant Nicola Sturgeon's thrown a grenade in and said she's going to have a second independence referendum? It was actually brilliant, because it threw the Tories and the British state into confusion. She didn't follow it up. Typical bourgeois politician. No guts. No guts, no glory. The alternative to that, I think we need to focus on this more on the revolutionary left in Scotland, but also elsewhere. If you were on the demonstration, the 20,000 strong demonstration, it was absolutely clear. I mean, it didn't come from nowhere. No organisation organised it, no political party put great input into it, but 20,000 largely working class people from all over Scotland on the streets of Glasgow, anti-austerity, anti-Tory, anti-racist, because there was a bunch of Nazis on George Square when we passed, and my God, everyone who passed silenced those bastards who were flying Union Jacks. Absolutely unequivocal stance that demonstration took. And are we part of that? Yes, we are. And we need to get into that movement and build it, because that roots working class organisation is going to be the difference whatever happens with Corbyn. People have joined the Labour Party, who we work with in Stand Up to Racism, all the united fronts that we've had. They are now looking to Corbyn as the disillusionment in the SNP is growing. What we need to do as a revolutionary left, and we are fragmented as a left, it's actually a disgrace what's happening, the sectarian deep inside the left in Scotland. We have to cut through that, argue for the class politics, and really get stuck in our communities, in that movement for independence. Finally, another issue we need to get stuck into is housing. The SNP have done nothing about the housing issue. Glasgow has the most number of high-rise blocks anywhere in Britain, and yet we had the smallest demonstration in Glasgow of anywhere in Britain in the wake of the Grenfell Tower. And that's not because people were not angry about it. That demonstration should have been able to march through the streets of Glasgow. And again, it's the weakness of the left being distracted, if you like, by Brexit and the rest of it. Don't be distracted. Get stuck into your communities where housing is an issue, where immigration is an issue, where racism is an issue. Let's get those movements built, because that will be the safety net for the disappointment that comes in the future if it comes with Corbyn.
One of my most memorable moments in the election campaign was actually watching Question Time. There was from Scotland, and there was a young woman in the audience who asked Emily Thornberry, who was the Labour Party's representative in the panel. She said to her, "I really, really want to vote for your manifesto. It's a brilliant manifesto. I think it's really inspiring. It's got all the things I believe in. But the problem is you won't support independence. Your manifesto opposes independence. So what am I going to do?" Now, needless to say, Emily Thornberry didn't actually have an answer to her. I don't know whether that woman did go away and vote for the Labour Party, but I think that what that represented was the kind of mindset that's going on amongst lots and lots of workers in Scotland at the moment. And it looks like, it looks now like that election was a bit of a watershed. It's broken the psychological logjam, and the idea, really, the new idea that Labour was never going to be electable again in Scotland, replacing the old sort of myth of the Tories were never going to be electable again in Scotland. And it's kind of thing, I really enjoyed Angela's presentation, because I think it really kind of examined all the complexities. It's a very multifaceted sort of account of the thing. And when I'm just thinking of some of the myths that have been blown out of the thing. The idea that Labour are red Tories in Scotland is a very, very powerful myth. The idea, really, that the Tories were never, ever going to be a force in Scotland ever again, blown out the water. The idea that Scotland is genetically to the left of England and Wales, blown out the water. And the idea that you're never going to see Labour electable again in England and Wales, again blown out the water. So I think that the common thread running through everything Angela was saying about the centrality of class politics is a vindication of what I think has been sometimes a really lonely journey for the SWP in Scotland, a really tough time. Because on the one hand, you have this absolute hegemony on the left of the idea that independence is a prerequisite for the struggle to achieve socialism. Now, that's not our position. Our position is that we support independence. Yeah, I'm just finishing. We support independence because we believe that we have to oppose the British state. We are opposed to the imperialism of the British state, and that's a reason why we support independence, not because Scotland is an oppressed nation. And therefore, it's not a matter of principle. It's a tactical issue. Actually, I think it very difficult to imagine circumstances where we wouldn't be supporting independence in the current kind of climate and likely foreseeable climate in Scottish politics. But I do think there is a huge difference between supporting independence from a principled socialist perspective perspective, and seen it as a precondition, seen it as a necessary stage to achieve socialism, which is really the hegemonic position amongst the rest of the left inside of Scotland. So I believe that really the situation now is very likely one that we are going to see a resurgence of the Labour Party in Scotland because of the success of Corbyn. It looks like that from the latest polls, and if there is an election in the next few months, I think it's very likely that that will continue. The complication, however, is that the SNP have been the left alternative for people in Scotland over the whole period of the last year. That's not going to unravel immediately, and therefore the argument vote left made sense in the last election. And if we are going to take a position in the next election about who to vote for, I think it would probably be something like vote Corbyn, back Corbyn, vote Labour, yes to independence, because the question of independence therefore becomes tactically more important if we're advocating a Labour vote, and that's the last thing I wanted to say.
Just on the Labour Party, I think the Labour Party in Scotland, Kezia's Labour Party, only campaigned in 3 constituencies, as far as I know. The one they had in Edinburgh, East Bartonshire, where they not East Bartonshire, East Renfrewshire, where they got beat, and East Lothian, another one they won. In all the other constituencies, they did hee-haw, they did nothing. But you look at the 7 constituencies in Glasgow, they won one, they lost one by 25, they lost another by 60. The closest, the biggest majority the SNP got was in Glasgow was 2,000, and that's with the Labour Party doing nothing on the ground. Michael mentioned the Corbyn rally a couple of Sundays before the election. That was over 1,000. There was lots of people that you've seen that not necessarily Labour Party members there, but people that have been involved in lots of other campaigns, including people involved in independent stuff as well, turned up for that. He also, day before the election, 8 o'clock in Buchanan Street, there was 500 or 600, Corbyn was there was 500 or 600 people at that time. And you look at if you go back to the local elections, Labour Party got 20% of the vote. They got 27% in the general election. If you go a couple of months further back, going by the opinion polls, they were on 15 or 16%. So I think the Corbyn effect, has had a sizable input in Scotland. So we should be quite clear about that.
It doesn't surprise me that the Corbyn effect also affected Scotland. There's no reason why it shouldn't, because actually he put class at the centre of his campaign, and that was bound to resonate in Scotland in the same way that it resonated in the UK. And I'd just like to make the simple point is actually if more Labour MPs had been returned in Scotland than were, then actually we might have been closer to a Corbyn government. So I mean, I think that's important, and the fact that people now in Scotland can see that the Corbyn government is possible is very, very important. And the other thing is that I wanted to say is we've always said that the SNP was a deflected expression of the bitterness and anger over the question of austerity and the question of class. And I actually want to talk about really what we're seeing, because it seems to me that we have to get this absolutely right. And I'm a bit worried about people simply saying, well, if we get a Corbyn government, then we'll see the disillusionment that we've got with the SNP in Scotland. The SNP have actually been in the government for 10 years, which is actually quite a long time. Because actually that is to underestimate the generational shift which is taking place at the moment. That my generation was moved by 68 and moved towards revolutionary politics. Different circumstances, but we went to revolutionary politics and not to Labour. The generational shift which is taking place, maybe more slowly in Scotland than it has been doing so far in England around Corbyn, is actually it's a generational shift into left reformism. And therefore, one of the things that we actually have to be addressing, and I think we have to address it north as well as south of the border, is actually how we engage with those people who are being mobilised around the Corbyn project, how we engage with them in such a way. And I think, you know, when Angela was talking about, you know, the question of Grenfell, the question of all those different class issues, how we engage with people, we have to be marching together but politically independent, because we actually have to be engaging with people in moving the fight forward against austerity and towards getting a Corbyn government north and south, and at the same time as saying it is not enough to get him elected and run through the arguments why revolution is actually really the only way we'll get the socialist project, which we have in common with the people who are actually behind Corbyn. And I think it's very important that we actually address that, you know, both north and south in the border. And I think, you know, we need to get a lot of discussion about exactly how we do that. The other final thing is, I think that Corbyn himself understands that if only he'd gone to Scotland more, he could have actually mobilised the vote and got the, you know, through mobilising the class argument in Scotland more. They realised they did too little in Scotland, and they were too respectful of Kezia Dugdale.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to open up the debate whether we got it right at the 2017 election. I mean, I think things have moved on. The only comment I would make is that, I mean, one of the things we recognised that, I mean, in Sheila's point about left reformism, the point about the SNP and independence was a variation of left reformism. And we've got to recognise that. In a sense, Scotland was ahead of the rest of the UK, and that's why we put us in a difficult position. We never voted SNP because we recognised the SNP was a kind of bourgeois nationalist party, but we've got to recognise that the independence movement was a variation of that fight for reform and change and anti-austerity, and that's why we had to get involved in it. But I think we've also got to understand, I mean, people are moving on, the dynamic that's taking place in Scotland with the impact of Corbyn. And I think people look in Scotland and see what happened at Grenfell Tower, for example, and think, well, there's a reflection of our experience in Scotland on housing, on inequality, on austerity. That's there. They'll look at what's happening at Glastonbury, and they want a bit of that. You know, they want a bit of that. I mean, it starts to look as if they said it, used the expression, the gloss is coming off the SNP. There's an alternative coming up here that looks like fighting austerity. So I think our job as socialists in Scotland is to actually build on that and to move that forward. And I mean, listening to the debates and the discussion on the Corbyn effect, and the campaign that's going to take place on to get rid of the Tories and get Corbyn into government, we can't sit back in Scotland and say that's the English's job. That's for working class people in England. It's our job as well. We've got to be part and parcel of that movement in Scotland. And I say that because there are sections of the Scottish left will argue that. Will argue that they will use independence as a barrier for fighting against austerity. The only way forward, SNP and independence. And we cannot be neutral, and so therefore I think the logic that we've got of that in Scotland is if there was an immediate election, I agree with Roddy's formulation, I think we would have to say vote Corbyn, get rid of the Tories. That is concretely what we have to do now. Having said that, we've got some responsibility because we were involved in the All Under One Banner, organising that All Under One Banner demonstration. We've been involved with the independence movement, and independence remains popular. I mean, John Curtis has been mentioned, but his latest opinion poll was in March showed 46% of people in Scotland still supporting independence. I mean, Corbyn will have an impact of it, and Angela was quite right. The issue of independence is separate from the SNP. So we've got a responsibility to explain to these people, to work with them on the issue of independence, and argue that we have to unite. The left in Scotland, whether they're for Corbyn or for independence, have to unite around the issue of austerity, pay. Let's get concrete action off the ground, build confidence on that, and fight for a Corbyn government, but don't ignore the issue of independence.
How do we explain the SNP's behaviour? the simplest way of doing it is thinking back to what Marx said and what Lenin said about bourgeois democratic demands and how the bourgeoisie reacts. Basically, the SNP wants independence. But to do it, they have to mobilise the working class to get it. And you can see it. They're ready to be anti-austerity, but they don't want to be anti-austerity to the point where workers go on strike for better pay, workers go on strike against cuts, etc., etc. So they're caught. They want to push it, but every time they get close to it, they back off. And that was why, people, Trotsky talks about permanent revolution, etc., etc. The SNP will never be able to deliver the vote for independence through its own actions. It will only be by forces from outside pushing it. So that's the first thing I wanted to say. Second thing I wanted to say, so what's going to happen to these forces outside? And it will be very easy. If you think that elections are everything, then you'll be very confused. Is it going to be Corbyn? Is it going to be the SNP? Elections are the weakest, most irrelevant form of class expression. Actually, we will have, in the future, on the one hand, a massive support for Corbyn, because he stands for anti-austerity, hand in hand with a massive support for independence, because it stands for anti-austerity. Don't be confused by the voting. It's about the movement underneath. In other words, the movement for independence will not disappear. Will not disappear because it reflects in the same way the Corbynism. They're together. Third thing I wanted to say is this. We had a very, very interesting radical independence meeting in Edinburgh. And on the platform there was George Caravan, who's just lost his MP position. And we had somebody from Momentum, and there was brilliant speeches. And George Caravan mentioned Lenin and the crisis of capitalism, etc., etc., etc. And the person from Momentum mentioned Lenin and all this sort of stuff. And they were on the way. And our comrade over there, Duncan Smith, who's chair of Unison in Edinburgh, stood up and said, those were brilliant speeches. You spoke, against austerity and against the cuts. You spoke against... How is the council, which is a Labour SNP coalition, going to vote at the next election? Everybody at the next vote on cuts. Everybody knew they were going to vote for cuts. In other words, the way we cut through all of that sort of stuff is what people have said. We fight from below. That's still on.
The place that I work in, it's a major arms manufacturer. Basically, it's a split workforce. I can walk into a office and I will see Union Jacks on the desk. Right? As far as I'm concerned, my position, I'm the biggest fiend in the yard. Right? That's the position I take. I'm independent right to the end, bitter end, no pun intended. That's the position I take. I'm fighting against British imperialism, British unionism, and all that entails. Now, just in case people have forgot, it's the Labour Party that gave us PFI in Scotland, right? It's the Labour Party who in some places is actually in cahoots with the Tories and local councils as well. Now let's just say, and this is a possibility, we have an election soon, and we have the Scottish election soon, and we have a position where effectively SNP melts down and we have no overall control. Will we be voting Labour when Labour joins in a coalition with the Tories? As postulated by Ruth Davidson. Is that what we're saying? Because I don't think anybody here could vote for that. Because we're not talking about Corbyn's Labour Party in Scotland. We're talking about Deputy Dugdale's party. Right? We're talking about the party of Gordon Brown. We're talking about the party of Ian Gray. OK, there might be some move to the left in it, but I don't see any seismic change in the Labour Party in Scotland. I don't see anybody threatening Deputy Dugdale. Deputy Dugdale kept Corbyn out of Scotland, and she still keeps him out of Scotland. Her project is to return things to the default position. That's the reality of it. That's what she's about. Now, I am under no illusions of the SNP. The SNP are a disappointment, and they always were going to be a disappointment. I think we know that. But see, having a position like vote left, what does that mean? Right? What does that actually mean? Right? Oh, in Robbie Shepherd's seat, I'll vote for him. Right, but in some other unknown so-called left person in Labour, Labour guy will vote for him. No, that's no good enough. What we have to understand is we've actually got quite a good record in Scotland, outside of the official movement, for what it is. You've all seen, many of you have been on the anti-racist demonstrations that have taken place in Scotland, particularly in Glasgow. I thought they were good. Right? We were the only organised left faction in the Irish Republican Easter Rising March, which was over 10,000 at one point, till half of them went to the pub when we got to the city centre. And then we had then we had that demonstration there. We've been part of that. There is a real organic movement from below with people that we will have to be part of. Now, I actually think the left's in dire position in Scotland, and actually I include the SWP in that also. We've actually got to look at ourselves. What do? We have to reform, reorganise ourselves. You need to go into your workplace and in your community. You have to do what the Bolsheviks done. Be the guy that goes about collecting the Copex for the workers' insurance scheme. You have to find an issue in your workplace to organise around. And me, it's health and safety. You organise. You find something and you try to rebuild a left from below. But I have to say this to a lot of you. We can't afford to be fair weather friends in the national question. It's there, it's not going to be away. It's part of the Scottish political climate now, and we need to accept that.
This will be our last speaker. Sorry, there was too many hands to get anyone else in, unfortunately. There was not as much time as I actually thought at the end.
I actually think the SWP took the only decision we could take in Scotland, vote left. Faced with a SNP government implementing Tory cuts and vehemently right-wing Scottish Labour Party, very pro-union, what else could we do? We're not cheerleaders for either of them. So I think we made the right decision, John. On Labour in Scotland, it's fascinating because the most we can say is a kind of mini Corbyn bounce. There's some early evidence to suggest that some young people were attracted to Corbyn. But the Labour vote actually didn't increase terribly much at all. And there were other factors at play in terms of Labour's success. Very quick example, take the constituency of Rutherglen and Hamilton West. The Labour vote increased by 2%. The significant factor in getting Jed Killen elected in Rutherglen and Hamilton West was a 20% increase in the working class unionist vote, Tory vote there. That was a significant factor. So the key question is, will the poll that was published by YouGov in the last week, is that a one-off, or is that the start of a Corbyn kind of surge that we've had down there? Time will tell, and we'll measure that in two ways. The second one being the most significant. The first one is, will it give a boost to Philip to the left in terms of challenging Dugdale for the left leadership of Labour in Scotland? The second one, much more important, will it lead to a surge in membership in the Labour Party in Scotland in the way that it has down here, particularly amongst young people? That remains to be seen. That's why, for example, I think it's premature for Roddy to suggest that already we're kind of almost cheerleading for Corbyn and Labour. I think it's not quite as clear as that yet. I think we have to wait and see how things kind of emerge. As far as SNP is concerned, I think Angela summed it up perfectly. A dismal campaign. They concentrated on Brexit. 38% of those that voted yes in 2014 voted leave, etc., etc. What almost carried them over the line in 2014 for Indy and in 2015 to clean up in the election was independence but linked to a radical vision for change. Now, the interesting thing for us is SWP. There were already tensions in the SNP prior to the election. My goodness, they're even deeper now. Remember, it's a mass party, relative and in proportion to population, it's bigger than Corbyn's Labour Party. Huge number of young people and a lot of good left-wingers in it. The tensions there are almost at breaking point. And I think those of us in the SWP have to make more of an effort to relate to them. Final point, very, very quickly. Indy, it's not gone away. Sturgeon's not taking it totally off the table. One thing that characterises its support for independence is stability. There's been about 50 polls since 2014. The average support is about 46%. As far as we're concerned on the left in the SWP, we're absolutely clear. Class is at the centre of what we do. We fight back hard against austerity, but argue consistently for a campaign for India and the breakup of the British state.
So if Angela come back in for 10 minutes, and then that'll be us.
Okay, thanks for that. Just going to try and respond to a couple of points. First thing is just to repeat the thing that comrades have said, and the question of independence is a central kind of question for revolutionists, for socialists, for the left in Scotland is not going away. So there's not been a decline in it. I think the last comrade addressed that very clearly. It's not going away. And everything that we're talking about in terms of Corbyn and in terms of the decline of the actual turnout in the vote for the SNP as the independence pushing party, people need to look beyond that and say that hasn't taken away the question that independence is representing working class people's desires for a different kind of society, against austerity, for a freer Trident. Oh, forgot to mention Trident. Oh, there's a question. Sorry, oh my goodness, how could I do that? Trident, etc. So I want to say that. And also the SNP did win the election. They have got more MPs than all of the other parties combined. So we need to temper our analysis without getting carried away with the overemphasis that, and the reasons that the right wing and the media do that as well. So that's fine. Second point to reiterate is the SNP strategy in this election is what is being analysed. Why are we analysing it? Not because we're cheerleaders for the SNP, not because we're fixated on what this particular expression, bourgeois nationalism or the independence movement, or because of how many MPs they get, but because we need to be talking to working class people in terms of drawing conclusions that draw them more to conclude that the power for change in society lies in their own organisation, in their own hands, and their own destiny. SNP says your destiny. It's no, as socialists, as revolutionaries, as Marxists, we constantly make the argument that it's what we do, it's what you do, it's how people organise surrounding the Grenfell Tower, that community organises and how it relates their issues to the firefighters, to the rushes, those kind of concrete issues. So we're analysing the SNP to see how we, for that purpose. And the SNP has failed. It's failed to deliver for the generation, so I'll come back to that in a minute, that powered the Yes movement, that took it onto the streets, that took it into new forms of organisation, that took the British state to the brink of breakup in 2014. And there's a serious debate now inside the SNP, and that will take place even more so amongst those who, you get all that crap, I lent them their vote, I never lent them, just lent them their vote, or I've joined them just for just now. So that's a debate that we have got absolutely something to say. Not something to say just because as SWP or as revolutionaries, we've got a wee theoretical analysis, because we've worked alongside all of the people on all of the sides of that debate to further the particular class interests or the struggle at that particular point in time, and we've earned the right to talk and engage, and that's what we're doing. Interestingly, repeat something. We were at the Corbyn and Buchanan Street rally, we were at the Corbyn rally, we were at the all under one banner. And the message is the same at everyone. It's anti-racism, it's anti-Tory, it's anti-austerity. So we're analysing it for that point. And the conclusion is, don't put your faith in this organisation, SNP, that claimed to say we will deliver this change that you want, that we need, and they're not delivering it. Now, we would argue they're not delivering it for the reasons their job has always been to manage the expectations of a movement that they feared, to control the message, to use the movement to further their aims, to go step by step progressively to some sort of independent Scotland that sucks up the backside of the EU for what? For low taxation and a wee sop here and there. The thing that is absolutely fascinating in Scotland now is, for a long time I described the desire for the SNP as being like a thirsty person in a desert. Decades of absolutely nothing but no alternative to neoliberalism. Somebody comes along with a wee glass of water that's got a wee inch, and you're like, oh, that's a fountain. They're brilliant. That's magic. Now we've got somebody come along with a big pint jug of water or a lake and going, no, this is really social, And the desires of people to look, in electoral terms, we're talking about clearly because about the election, is going to cause a wee bit of a dilemma. They don't look so, social democratic or not quite socialist now that there's something real on the agenda. In saying that, though, I think we have to qualify what actually happened in Scotland with Corbyn. Really, honestly, it's not the same. I'm going to argue it's not the same. What does that mean? It means Corbyn had his 1,000 rally. Corbyn was up in Scotland before and has had massive attraction. But the people that go there wouldn't necessarily campaign for him during the election, but they're going there because that fits with their politics. A generational shift took place a few years ago in terms of the support for independence being really high amongst, the young age group. So also support for Corbyn is also highest amongst that age group, it was shown. But that didn't mean decline for independence fell. And really and truly, Scottish Labour, I repeat, I firmly believe, helped deliver the return of the Tories. I'm telling you, for 3 years they've banged on Scottish Labour about nothing but the referendum. Nothing about the union. Nothing but it. Everything they put out was anti-SNP. And they've helped reorientate and create that the key divide in Scotland was this issue. And I repeat, if that's the key divide, then why the hell no go and vote? The Tory vote did go up in everywhere. Why no? If that's what they're doing. So if we wanted less Tory MPs and more Labour MPs in Scotland, they should have not done what they did for the last 3 years. And they might have delivered a Corbyn victory. But oh, wait a minute. Did they really even want a Corbyn victory, the Scottish Labour leadership? No. If there had been a slightest little bit of leeway opened to the question of a second independence referendum even, not even the, please just go for independence, and it's like, here we go. But if there had been a slightest bit of relaxation or possibility of exploring the option, opened the floodgates, I think, got them over the edge on 3, 4, 5, 6, but they didn't do it. They didn't do it, they refused to do it. And actually, it's interesting, I don't know how much difference Corbyn being up there in Scotland would have done. Interesting, when Corbyn came to Buchanan Street, I don't know if there was 500, 600, there was loads, a few hundred. But it wouldn't have been the same, partly because in Corbyn, in England and Wales, that is it. And it's like, it is the expression, it's the culmination, it's the focus for everything inside and outside the Labour Party to beat back these Tory scum, to beat back these rulers. And in Scotland, Corbyn wasn't even that only option to beat back the Tories. What might, over the last 4 weeks, we've seen the support for Labour rise. What might do it is the fact now that Corbyn has shown that he can win. Yeah, win. So we're not just looking at voting Labour in terms of Kezia Dugdale, and Corbyn has shown he's win. I would say that is maybe going to have, that's just my opinion, maybe have merry an influence now, because that wasn't the case in the run-up to June the 8th. Do you know what I mean? I think you talked about that, Mike. Could Labour win, or who could win? So that's fine. Anyway, lastly, the SNP on education, just to come back to it. Not only are that whole story around about our FE strike, but you really need to, I would encourage people to look and read what the SNP is doing on education. I still can't fathom it, why they're doing it. We were talking, I don't know what demographic, I don't know what constituency they're appealing to when they put through things like standardised testing in schools, which have been opposed, but there's not been a big outcry. Standardised testing, which when challenged and said that's going to lead to league tables, Nicola Sturgeon said, we're not wanting league tables, but people will take the figures and they'll put them in league tables. Well, we can't do anything about that. Is that not in England and Wales? You're like, what? Standardised testing? Secondly, they've put through this governance review of schools, which is devolving control of budgets and everything, bypassing local authorities and giving it to heads. Does that sound familiar, comrades? Is that a wee bit go of light? And actually, this could be the culmination, because if there's any attempt to remove the power of teachers and to nationally bargain to do that, then, you know, I mean, there will need to be a serious class struggle taking that on, and it won't be anything related to the Tories. The other thing is this governance review might be hiding the fact that they're putting through cuts, because when they did all the college reorganisation over the last few years, it was a managerialist structural change. Meanwhile, the budget to FE was slashed hugely. FE took a massive hit. So we need to look at for the SNP doing things like this and concretely working inside our trade unions and our communities to counteract that, because I've always argued the criticism of the SNP is always got to be concrete, it's always got to be real, and it's always got to be based on furthering the struggle to win that struggle and that's how you do it. And just lastly, thank John for explaining our position in the last general election. I thought you did it well. That was it. That's what we did. That's what we did. So I thought you explained that very well, comrade. And is there anything else I want to say? No, that's it. So thanks very much. Cheers.